Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Art Chat. My name is Sarah Alspaugh, and I will be here to help you guys get your questions to Linda. So I just want to let everyone know that you can type your questions into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And after Linda's conversation with Joe, we'll have some time to ask your questions at the end of today's session. So type those questions there, and also everyone is in listen-only mode, and that just means you're muted so we don't get noise from your end. However, you should still be able to see and hear everything. So, all right, welcome, Linda. I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, thanks, and welcome everybody to the show. I'm going to start off with an apology. If you follow me on Facebook, you know I've been fighting a cold over the last week and a half. So hopefully with all of the cough drops that I have sitting in front of me and the glass of water, I won't go into a coughing fit. But if I do, I'll probably end up throwing my headset away from me. So just keep talking, Joe, if that ends up being an issue. But we're welcoming Joseph McGurl with us today, and Joe and I have been friends for a couple years now, and I've taken a couple of Joe's workshops when he's been down at the Art of the Carolinas, and it was really fascinating to me, his curiosity about painting equipment and tools, and how he doesn't let the fear of failing or messing up his painting worry him too much. He's just kind of hangs out there in this be fearless and curious world, and it's just really, really interesting to me. So I wanted to have Joe on the show, and we could talk a little bit about that. So welcome, Joe, and how are you doing?
Hi, Linda. Hi, Sarah. I'm doing well, thanks. And hello to everyone who's listening online.
Yeah, I think
good, and I'm looking forward to a fun conversation today.
Yeah, sorry. I keep hearing bings in my earphones, so if you guys are hearing that, it's because of some internet stuff I had going on. So I just shut that down, and apologize for that. So that could be annoying too. So Joe, let's start off talking about some rules, if you will, of painting, and how we let them inhibit our creativity. So I mentioned in our little introduction, the fear of messing up, or, I think the majority of us actually paint with brushes, or, experiment a little bit with palette knife, but you even go beyond that. So let's talk about, do we actually inhibit ourselves a lot?
I think, well, everyone's unique, and some artists do, and some artists don't. But I think the ones that do, it's always nice to move around and try something different. And I don't believe in rules. I mean, there are some truths, like red and yellow makes orange. But there's not, you always have these artists sort of spouting off all these little rules and that they think applies to everybody. But everyone's unique and everyone's different, and people are making their own types of artwork. So most of art is opinion. Most of what you hear people talking about is opinion, and opinion is never right or wrong. It's someone's idea, their theory, or their method of working, if they're an artist or whatever. So I don't really like to sort of make rules for myself, because then it's hard for you to break them. And you say, well, this is the way I do it. So I think one of the best ways to not be sort of intimidated with trying new things and experimenting is not to have these rules and say, well, I can't do this because, my personal rule tells me that I can't. It's, I'm always, people sometimes ask me, like, what direction my art's going in. And I always say, well, if I knew, I'd be there now. It just sort of evolves, and I sort of follow the flow. I don't say, well, I'm moving towards this type of painting, but I'm not doing it yet. So I always sort of mosey around and see what is interesting to me and what I can do differently from the last painting I did, because every painting that you do, you want to make better than the previous ones, and you want to keep improving. And one way you can do that is by using different materials and investigating different techniques and philosophies and such. When I was in college, I remember there was the head of the painting department. He's a fairly well-known painter, and he would make these pronouncements. And one was that the artist must not destroy the integrity of the brush mark, which meant you had to put the brush mark down and leave it there. And if you saw the shape of the brush mark, that was good. And for him, it worked great. You know, I thought he did terrific paintings, but for other artists who are trying to do something different, it doesn't apply at all. So it's, you know, it's, I think pronouncements like that that I think hinder artists in their sort of their journey of discovery and what they're trying to do with their artwork. Like I said, you know, most things that artists discuss are opinion, because you know there's no real rules in art in a way. There are truths, you know, as I said about, you know, color mixing and value and things like that, but there's not any real rules. So you know, I think the best thing that people can do is to be a little bit open to new techniques, and not those, you know, sometimes these little kernels, they stick in your head and it takes a long time to say, well, no, actually that's not necessarily true. So sort of investigate everything that you've been told, and, you know, always look at it with a little bit of doubt.
And I think, oh, sorry, I was just going to add, I think a lot of finding our own voice comes from the experimentation that we allow ourselves to do.
Right, and it should be sort of a natural progression from, you know, one thing to the next rather than something contrived. And the natural progression comes out of your own curiosity. Mm-hmm. And you're sort of yearning to make the next painting better than the previous one. And, you know, it's always a struggle. No one's ever made the perfect painting. And I think, you know, the Rembrandt was probably never happy with his paintings. It's like, oh, I know I can do better next time. So he would try something slightly different, trying to improve. Mm-hmm. I think one of the problems is when people, you know, they're sort of somewhat satisfied with their art and they think that they're in a good spot. And then they get complacent and then repetitive. And there's every now and then I'll see an artist and they've kind of been painting the same painting for 20 years. And it's, you know, maybe slightly different one way or the other, but it's basically the same painting. And for me, I'm never happy with the painting I just finished. I always feel like I can do better, so I don't want to paint the same painting. Oftentimes I'll stick with a theme. Like there's one I've been doing with the sunlight reflecting on water. There's another theme I have, trying to get transparency, seeing in like through to the ocean. And I've been doing some monochromatic paintings and very sort of austere paintings, and sort of geometric and symmetrical compositions and things. So, but I'll work with one of those themes for a while till I think I've investigated as much as I can and got what I can out of it. And so I think that helps too, is when you're onto some aspect of the art world that intrigues you, stay with it long enough so they can really investigate it and determine whether this has any use for you, or if there's, you know, any you can take with it, rather than trying it once and tossing it out and saying, I don't like that. A lot of times it just takes practice and staying with it and figuring out how, you know, the particular materials or color or whatever the thing you're investigating is going to work out.
And you won't necessarily share those paintings that you're investigating with. In other words, you may talk about it and stuff like that, but, you know, we may not see the hundreds or whatever that are going in behind this new investigation that you're doing. You're going to share that beautiful painting that we always see online, but not. Yeah, go ahead.
Most of my paintings end up making it out there into the world somehow or other. You know, this is how I make my living, so I can't spend forever goofing around without really accounting for myself financially.
Right.
So, you know, the paintings, sometimes I'll just beat them to death, and I'll be just working and working and working. And, you know, it's a long process, but eventually I have to put something out there in order to support myself.
Right.
So I don't have the luxury of like stashing away, you know, hundreds of unfinished paintings or sort of half thought out paintings.
Yeah.
The great thing about oil painting is you can just keep working it and scraping it down and sanding it and starting again and such. Or if I were working in watercolor or pastel, it wouldn't be as easy.
Right.
But, you know, when I'm trying some new aspect of the art world, I'm already, you know, 80% of the way there. It's not like I'm chucking everything that I ever knew and starting fresh. It's right. More of an evolution for me than sort of a revolution, where I sort of evolve from one style of painting or one theme into another. So it's, I kind of have an idea of where I'm going when I'm starting on a new journey. It's not like I'm starting from scratch.
Yeah, and I guess as a teacher, I hear this all the time as from the students. They'll be painting and I'll say, well, you try this, come over here, try this, and we'll play around with it like on a, palette knife, or I'll have a board off to the side, and I'll show them what I like them to try, or something, encouraging them to be a little more experimental and curious with things. And I constantly always hear, it's like, I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up, I don't hear that as much from like you yourself. It's like, well, let's try this, let's see what happens. And it's almost like you've gotten over that fear of messing up the painting, because I don't know, maybe there's a confidence level there that you can fix it, or if anything, you can scrape it off, right?
Yeah. And I think that one of the problems is that sort of the intimidating factor prevents people from really exploring fully the thing that they're trying to explore. For instance, I use a lot of palette knife in my paintings. And when I do a workshop, I'll do a palette knife demo, and I'll have the students sort of paint along, and almost all of them never put enough paint on the surface so they can push the paint around with the knife. They're all too timid. And so I guess that comes from the fear of messing up and not coming out with a great painting. But when I do my workshops, the first thing I ask is, who's going to do a great painting today? And I always catch a couple people, they raise their hand and they say, wrong answer, everyone does a bad painting, because we're trying new things and we're trying things you haven't done before. And if you're worried about making a good painting, then you'll never sort of have that freedom to say, well, if I screw it up, I can always fix it, and I can start again, or whatever. You're always worried about, oh, I hope I don't mess it up. And one of the problems is, you're in a class with all these other painters and you don't really know them, and you want to prove to them that you're not a hack, that you can paint. So it makes you even more intimidated. So that's why I tell them, no one's doing a good painting. If you do a good painting, you did it wrong. You have to do, something that's new, and you don't want to be worried about making art, because when we're doing a workshop, we're not making art. You do that when you get home. We're learning specific techniques and specific processes and stuff that you may or may not use, but it's sort of opening you up to something new.
Right. Yeah, I was in a really interesting situation one time with Kevin McPherson, who was mentoring me at the time, and I was, painting and trying to paint. He was trying to actually teach me, and and I was more worried about impressing Kevin than I was about what he was trying to say to me and what habits he was trying to break. And it was really interesting, because I remember getting in a conversation with him, and I said, well, Kevin, I'm just trying to impress you. And Kevin came back with, well, then do what I'm telling you to do. I was like, oh, okay, never mind. It's like, and then it was, I had to get past that. Some people call it ego. Some people call it, I had to get past the point of, my artwork really needed help, and I really needed to see that. And here I was trying to do, here I was doing all the bad habit things, and it was just all continually turning out the same. So getting over that initial fear and intimidation is kind of hard, but at the same token, you also have to let go of that, I'm here to impress somebody or something like that.
Right.
To try and get to that voice. It's an interesting, I guess it's an interesting conundrum, because we also want to have that voice present before we post something out to the world or share the paintings, because we do want it to be nice. So so that's, you're constantly fighting that, I'm sure. So
in the ideal world, we'd all be independently wealthy, and we could play along with ourselves in our studio forever and not have to worry about putting things out there into the world. Of course, eventually you want to, because art is a form of communication, so you want to communicate what you're thinking and such to the greater world. But it'd be nice if you had the luxury of perfecting it before you put it out there. But then, of course, it would never get out there if you're waiting for it to be perfect.
And it really gives you an appreciation.
There is no perfect art.
Right, and it really gives you an appreciation for someone like Claude Monet, who had that confidence and courage to, do the things that he did at a time when it was so vastly different than the art that was out there.
Right.
So that confidence does play a big role in what we're doing.
Right, and they also had their support group, all the other impressionists, and even before them, the Barbizon painters were
Mm-hmm.
somewhat, sensitive to the philosophies and such of the impressionists.
Right. And
So that's
so,
the other thing that's nice if you have sort of a support group out there that can sort of see what you're doing and,
yeah,
give you some moral support.
yeah, that's always helpful for sure. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that you use that aren't palette knives and aren't
Yeah.
brushes. Because I loved it when we were down at the Art of Carolinas and I took the first workshop from Joe, and we get this, the supply list, and it has things on it like putty knives and all these different things, and I'm like, oh, come on, I don't really need this. But I actually did need this because it was really helpful if you had the equipment that Joe sent out on his equipment list. So go through some of those really kind of strange things that folks wouldn't necessarily think that they need in their toolbox.
Sure. Well, one of the things I use is a white called underpainting white. It's made by Winsor Newton. I like it because it's really thick, and when I'm in the field, it sets up pretty quickly. On a sunny day, within 10 or 15 minutes, it'll be very stiff, so I can continue painting on top of it. And I can make my plein air sketches. I can finish them up to a pretty much done right in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And because I can keep layering on top of the white paint, I don't have that problem of getting too much paint on the surface and it gets all soupy and you can't do anything with it. So the underpainting white is good, and Winsor Newton's brand is the one that sets up the fastest, which is why I use it. I also use it in the studio because it's kind of thick and it retains its texture fairly well, and it's also there's not a lot of oil in it. So for my underpainting, it's good because it applies to that rich over lean progression that you want in your layers of paint as you work on the painting. So the first few passes through my painting, I'll use the underpainting white as my white. Later on, when I'm getting more near the finished stages of the painting, I'll use a regular titanium white because it has a little bit more oil. And the underpainting white isn't quite as brilliant as like a titanium white is. But I like it because it's easy to manipulate it, and I like to push the paint around a lot. And the underpainting white really works well for that. And I also use a medium called liquid impasto, which is sort of a gel medium. There again, it sets up fairly quickly, and it gives a lot of body to the paint. And I use a lot of palette knife in my work, so the gel medium makes it much easier to push the paint around and manipulate the paint with the palette knife. And then for my colors, it's just a warm and a cool of the red, yellow, and blue, burnt umber, black, and white. So it's just a pretty much standard palette. Then I have some tools that I use that I've found kind of useful over the years. One is a taping knife, which is if you're plastering a wall and you put some tape on the sheetrock to join two pieces, you'll use this knife to smear some plaster down along the joint. It's about maybe 12 inches wide. They vary in width. The one I like is about 12 inches wide, and I use that for making straight edges in my paintings. I'm one of those artists who can't draw a straight line. So one day I realized, well, why don't I get something to help me draw the straight line? So I got this taping knife I saw in a hardware store, and I used that to draw my lines in with paint. I can put the taping knife up along the edge that I want to be straight and just run the paint along it. I take the taping knife off and I look and I have a nice straight line. So it really comes in useful for architecture and horizon lines and such. I also use it for drawing in the early stages. If I'm putting a vanishing point in, I can use this as a ruler just to get my my lines going straight to the vanishing point. So they're inexpensive. You can get them at any hardware store. They're called a taping knife. I use a lot of sculpting tools. Years ago, I had the scalpel that I was using to scratch into the paint, and then I saw in the art supply store they have all kinds of sculpting tools with sharp, pointy ends on them. They vary a little bit in terms of what the end actually looks like, but they make different types of marks. So I can scratch it into the paint either when it's wet or dry with sculpting tools. I use a wire brush. Sometimes I'll drag the wire brush through wet paint. It'll give sort of a striated look to it. Sometimes when the paint's dry, I'll scratch little areas of the paint if I want to scruff it up a little bit. And I also have a striating tool, which is it's a roller with these discs on it. They're sort of steel discs. And it's used for decorative painting. If you were going to paint a wall and you wanted this sort of striated effect, you would drag this through the wet paint. And I use that for putting making the ocean mostly. It's kind of a good tool for painting the ocean at a distance where you have all these little waves. Mm-hmm. And I'll drag that through the wet paint, and it'll make a texture, like a random dotted texture through the paint. There again, sort of a striated look. And I'll let the paint dry, put a glaze on it, and then I can wipe the glaze off, and it'll settle into the cracks and the little crevices of the striating tool made. So it'll be darker in the crevices, and I've wiped it off of the little bumps. So I have this beautiful texture that I can create with the striating tool. I use scruffy brushes, I call them. They're actually just paint brushes that I've given a scruffy haircut edge to them. Years ago, I was painting a tree, and I had a hard time getting away from the squareness of the paintbrush. Every time I put a mark down, it was square. So I try to sort of angle and tilt the brush sideways or in such a way so it wouldn't make a square mark. And then I thought, why am I fighting this? I'm painting an irregularly organic shaped object with a square brush. So I got my scissors out, and I made the edge of the paintbrush all scruffy edged and like it had a bad haircut. And suddenly, like 90% of the work was done for me with painting this organic shape of the foliage in the trees, in the bushes. I just sort of dab the brush and twist and turn it, and it gets this random, really organic, unique brush mark effect. And I also use sponges sometimes. Watercolor guys can use sponges, so I said, why can't I? So I'll use sponges sometimes for painting foliage. There's a tool called a rubber wipeout tool or a paint shaper. Either I've seen it by both of those names in art stores. And it's like a paintbrush, but it's got a rubber tip on it. And you can use that to draw into wet paint and to clean up edges of if you drew a line that's a little bit crooked, you can wipe the paint off with that tool. So that works really well. I use it a lot for drawing into the wet paint. I'll put down a layer of paint and then make marks into that with this rubber wipeout tool. And so those are some of the materials or the tools that I use. And I'm always looking for different ways to make unique marks, because when you paint landscapes, there's just this infinite amount of texture out there. And one of the issues that you have to confront is how you're going to convey that sense of texture and living, growing foliage and such that you're trying to paint. And so by using a lot of different marks, making a lot of different marks, you can replicate somewhat what you see in nature. And it gives a lot more variety to your painting when you have different edges and different mark making. Unlike the teacher who wanted me to maintain the integrity of the brush mark, one of the things that I didn't like about his paintings is that all the surfaces look the same, whether he's painting the side of a building or a car or trees, they all had sort of the same mark making. And with me, one of the beautiful things of nature is the variety of texture and surfaces that you see. And so I want to try to replicate that in my paintings. I also will manipulate the surface that I'm painting on. And there's these additives that you can add to the gesso. I use acrylic gesso. And there's glass beads, for instance, that you can add to the gesso, which will give it a very bumpy look. And there's modeling paste and crackling paste and these different materials that you can add to the gesso, and it gives each one has sort of these unique characteristics which will give a different look to the support that you're painting on, or the ground that you're painting on actually. And then lately I've been adding sand to my paintings. I did a painting of a beach scene, and I thought, now how am I going to paint all of this sand? And years ago, my dad was an artist, and years ago I remembered he did a painting of some clam diggers, and he used beach sand in that painting. I thought, maybe I'll try the beach sand trick. And it actually worked out kind of nicely. I liked it. And I had 3 different grades of sand that I sifted. I had fine, medium, and coarse. I put the coarse sand in the foreground, and then it got a little finer as it went off in the distance, and the far distance was the finest grade of sand. So it gave the idea of the sand receding in space, and as the grains got finer as they went further away from your eye.
So did you paint?
I'm experimenting with that a little bit.
Did you paint over the sand, Joe, or did you just leave the sand there the color that it was?
I left some of it as it was, and then I stained some of it with just sort of a thin layer of paint, and then in the distance I painted it solid because I wanted it to, there again, as it goes further in the distance, not only would the grains of sand get smaller, but they would also change in color a little bit. So I painted the distant ones, and I left them less painted as it came to the foreground.
Cool.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. I like to experiment a little bit more with that, and also with adding sort of sculptural elements into my painting. When I was a kid, I used to work with my dad, who was an artist, and he did a lot of work in churches and painting statues and murals and gold leafing and all those type of things. And I was always fascinated with the Stations of the Cross because they're these little relief sculptures. And it's always, it was interesting to me to figure out how the artist melded the flat, like sort of one-dimensional background with the sculptural relief of the foreground, and how he dealt with perspective and foreshortening and things like that. And so I'm getting a little bit interested in maybe introducing sculptural elements into my painting, or 3-dimensional elements into my paintings, such as the sand, and who knows what's next. I'm kind of trying to figure out how to do it without it looking gimmicky, and also have it look right, so it's not jumping out at you. Like the sand, you really don't notice at first, and it takes you a minute before you realize, oh, that's sand. So I want it to be a little bit subtle. So that's kind of one of the things I'm thinking about lately.
Right. Yeah, that goes to something that I kind of, it was kind of an aha for me a while ago, where when I started playing around with my palette knives and started this, and decided that I was going to paint, as much as I could with my painting with my palette knife, and it kind of like, it was a dawn on me moment where it was like, the people that I want to enjoy my painting and be transcended by the painting, they don't care how we create the painting. They just want to enjoy it. The only ones that care how we create it are other artists like us, who are sort of going, how did they do that effect? But the people that we went to them also to enjoy the painting. But it's more like, I'm thinking like collectors and viewers of our artwork that aren't artists. They don't care how particularly it was made. They're interested in the emotion and the effect and the transcendence that happens from a wonderful painting.
Right, and for me, that's one of the sort of the aggravating things about art, is because for me, how it was made is really important, and the philosophy behind how it was made and such, but the general public really doesn't care that much how it was made. It's like, oh, I like that.
Yeah, and they don't know why.
In a way, they can't appreciate the different aspects, the artistic aspects that a particular painting will possess, and but they've got other things going on in their life other than art.
Right, and it also gives you something to talk about if you happen to be there at an exhibit or something, and a show that you're doing, and and they don't know anything about how art is created. It gives you an opportunity to kind of educate them too. But so I guess I kind of used that philosophy of mine to kind of give me an excuse to go out and start celebrating and lifting, or exploring and lifting away the thing where it says, well, I either have to use a brush, or I have to use a particular palette knife, or I have to use something else. It's really kind of freeing, because the other day in the class that I was teaching, and one of my students was like, I can't get this exactly right, and I walked up and grabbed one of the paper towels and I used the paper towel on it, and they were like, oh. I said, yeah. It's like, I'm allowed to use that? Yeah, you can use whatever you want. You use your finger if you want. I don't care. So so and it is so freeing when they finally realize that they can move on to something else, so, or use something
Right.
else in painting.
And with landscapes,
So
one of
I
the
want to
hardest
remind folks.
aspects.
Oh,
Go ahead.
hold on one second, Joe. Let me remind everybody. If you have questions for Joe, type them in where Sarah talked about. There's a little box off there to your right side, I think, on your screen, and you can type your question in there for Joe, and we'll be getting to those here in about, I don't know. It depends on how much more Joe and I talk, but in a little bit. So go ahead, Joe. What were you going to say?
Well, one of the things about landscapes is there is so much to paint. Like sometimes I hear people say that the figure is like sort of the hardest thing to paint, and that's like the epitome. But actually, I think it's the landscape, because with the figure you have so many things that you can control. You can control the lighting, so you can paint exactly what you see, because the same light that you have on the subject is the same light you can have on your canvas. And you don't have all this texture. Generally the skin is fairly smooth. You just really be able to draw well. Both the landscape, not only do you have to draw well, but you have to render all these different surfaces. And they're so different as far as their physical characteristics. You have a cloud in one sense, and then you have an ocean. And try painting the ocean. It's this moving thing. It's like if you were painting a model and their hands kept moving. It's kind of difficult to paint that. But when you're painting a landscape, everything is moving. The trees are blowing, the clouds are coming and going, the light is changing. The ocean's, not only is it moving, but the tide's coming in or it's going out. And then you have these beautiful reflections, and now the wind comes along and it's destroyed your reflections. So there's so much that you have to sort of invent when you're painting landscapes. And there are just so many different textures and surfaces that you've got to somehow render. And they're also unique and different. And if you're painting architecture, you have a tree that with this really organic, gnarly shape to it, and then you have this sort of very solid, straight, square architectural element that you're painting also. So there's just so much information that you've got to record, particularly when you're plein air painting, that it's a really difficult thing. And so I'm always looking for little tricks that can help me to paint faster, because when you're painting in nature, you've got to paint fast because it's always changing, and also paint more accurately, and to be able to capture the essence of all these different features that you're painting. A tree is much different than a rock, which is different than a cloud, and different from a building, different from a person. So you've got to have a lot of different tools and techniques at your disposal. So you can, otherwise everything looks kind of like it was painted in the same way with the same brush, and it doesn't have the uniqueness that we have in the world out there that we're trying to capture.
Yeah, I'm admiring the painting that you have that we're showing right now with the ocean and the moonlight and the lighthouse to the right. And I just want to say, if you have not seen Joe's work in person, and the computer doesn't do it justice, so computer screens, because there really is a lot of texture in here, and it's don't yell at me, Joe, but some people would look at this and go, oh, it's very photorealistic because your drawing is so strong. And but in the computer screen is taking something that's three-dimensional and making it very flat looking. And what I mean by that is it's, it doesn't look like it may not have a lot of texture to it, and it could be my monitor too that I'm looking at, but there really is. I mean, I was surprised when I saw your work in person at just how much texture you do have and how much paint you do use when you're painting. It's totally different than looking at it in a computer, and so much, actually. I mean, I marvel at them on the computer, but you'll marvel at them even more when you see it in person. So I just want to kind of like make that comment, because if folks haven't seen your work in person, they may be questioning a little bit of just how thick that paint is.
Yeah, it gets pretty thick in some areas, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do too, is vary the quality of the paint for the different elements that I'm painting. For instance, the sky, I'll generally paint very thinly and smoothly because it's this ethereal sort of elusive thing that we're painting,
right?
As opposed to, say, a rock that has this solidity and mass and such with it. So they're different elements, so I want to paint them differently rather than painting each element the same, as if they're composed of the same things and they have the same characteristics. So it seems like if they're that different in nature, they should also be really different in my interpretation of them. And so, and the texture is just another way to give them differences and to make the differences somewhat replicate the differences that we experience them when we see them in nature. I know people, a lot of times they'll say that, oh, your paintings have so much detail, but most of it isn't really painted detail, it's sort of implied detail. A lot of it's done with texture and putting a glaze and wiping it off and having the cracks in the surface pick up the glaze and have it wiped off the high spots. And so a lot of the the texture is more implied texture than actually paint. I'm sorry, a lot of the detail is more implied detail than actually painted detail. But I try to keep really accurate with my drawing because that's the underpinning of every piece of artwork is really it has to be drawn well. And a lot of people think that, oh, if you're a landscape painter, you don't have to really worry about drawing that much. It doesn't matter exactly what the shape of the tree was. But if you have these sort of loose interpretations of everything, eventually everything is a little bit sloppy and ill-drawn, and it adds up. And by the end of the painting, it's not a very good painting because all these little flaws in the drawing start to show up. So you do have to be a really good draftsman to be a landscape painter also. I spent a couple of years doing site-size figure drawing with an artist in Boston, Robert Cormier, who learned the French Academy methods of site-size drawing. And so I spent 2 years just drawing with him because I realized my drawing was weak after I got out of college because we really didn't have a very strong drawing course in college. They were more into the abstract stuff, the college that I went to.
Right. So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about how you find your subjects to paint. And Sarah, Joe, I want you to talk about the first painting that we showed. Sarah, if you can go back to the one that is the airplane from the view from your window. This one. This is fascinating to me. And you were flying what, Indianapolis? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, there's a show it's called The Quest for the West, and it's at the Idlejoy Museum in Indianapolis. And I was going out for the opening, and we left. I had to fly out of Washington, D.C. I was down there for some other thing, but I had to fly to Washington, D.C., and I get to the terminal, and they're boarding the plane like an hour before, and they announced that they were going to try to leave early if everyone was there because there was a line of thunderstorms they were trying to beat into Minneapolis. So I get on the plane, I'm flying and looking out the window, and there's this amazing thunderstorm out the window, and I didn't really plan on doing any plein air painting out the plane window, but I did have a pen and a piece of paper, and I thought, oh, this is just so amazing, I have to draw it. So I drew some pen and ink, ballpoint pen drawings of what I was seeing and made some notes and such, and I thought, oh, this would be a really fun painting to do. And so then when I got home, I started working on it, and so that's how it happened. But I'm always weather fascinates me. Being a landscape painter, I spent a lot of time looking at the weather and sometimes fretting over it. But it, the thunderstorm was just so powerful, and I was really interested in the quality of light from the lightning and the quality of light from the city below, and this idea of sort of man-made light versus nature-made light was really fascinating for me also. And I also like the geometry of the city lights and the streets and such compared to the sort of the randomness of the clouds being illuminated by the lightning strike. And I also was wondering, can I paint it so it looks like what it is? Because lightning is fast, and it's a bang and a flash of light. And so when you look at my painting, there's no flash of light. The light's always there, and there's no bang.
Right.
So it was kind of a challenge to myself. Can I paint something so it looks like it's lightning? And I didn't want to put the lightning bolt down because it seemed a little bit too hokey to me. So I wanted to imply the lightning, that the lightning is behind the clouds, and it's just the light from that bolt of lightning coming out that's sort of illuminating the clouds. And so it was kind of sometimes I sort of set myself up for a problem and then try to solve it. And that's kind of what I did with this painting, I think, was trying to solve this issue of trying to create an instantaneous flash of light and a bang in one sort of image that you don't hear anything and you don't see anything that's moving. It's just sort of frozen time.
Right. Yeah, I really like this one. I don't remember if you shared it online or where I saw it. I don't know if I saw it down in Carolinas or wherever, but it just was captivating to me, and I really, really liked it. So I wanted to come back and talk about that one. So is there any other particular one that you'd like to talk about, Joe, or just go through them and talk about them a little bit each, or?
Yeah, if you wanted to scroll through as they come up, I could say a word or two about them.
Yeah.
This one here we're looking at is called the Plein Air Study of Granite Seawalls. It was done in Rockport. And I tried to do a very simple, sparse composition without anything sort of extraneous to it. And I thought, I'm just going to paint rocks in the ocean. And it was a little bit of an unusual composition where there again, it's sort of symmetrical with the stones on the right and the left balancing each other. Mm-hmm. It was really just a way to understand. We were in Rockport, I was with Plein Air Painters America, and we were painting in Rockport for a week, and there were these amazing stone granite seawalls and piers and jetties all around. And I wanted to understand how they were put together and how the stones sort of interlocked and what sizes and shapes and colors and such they were. So I thought, I'm just going to do a study of a granite seawall here. In the actual scene, there were some boats tied up to the seawall, but they weren't of interest to me, so I didn't put them in. They kind of cluttered up the composition too much. So this was really pretty much just a study, trying to understand a little bit about these walls.
I like the little boat in the, right below the horizon line that connects you to the sky above.
It needed something to break up the horizon line the whole way.
Yeah. Yep. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I was like, oh, I never thought about doing that. So now I do.
This one is called Last Light of Winter, and I made this one up in my studio. There's a couple of flooded cranberry bogs around here and some ponds and the ocean, of course, but it was mostly I had this conception of the lighting situation with this warm light with the cool of the snow and maybe reflecting in the water. So this is pretty much a contrived composition. But I was really trying to create this effect of sort of a melancholy effect of, a sort of a deep winter evening as the sun's going down. Try to create the effect of coldness and silence, and but also a little bit of hope in a way, because of the warm colors of the setting sun are a little bit, for me, they're a little bit sort of hopeful, like it's not all dire in the middle of winter. And the trees in the foreground have a little bit of a sinister look to them too, with a sort of gnarly and bent and ghoulish in a way almost.
Yeah. So, talk a little bit about, if you can remember, and it may have, your technique may have changed a little bit since then too, but of the equipment that you were talking about earlier, the trees here that were made, was that made with the brush that you cut up and?
Yeah, the foreground trees, the sort of the little tiny branches, were made with the scruffy brush, sort of dry brushing it on top of the surface. And also the trees in the hillside with the sun, with the light from the sun sort of shining behind them, were made with the scruffy brush, sort of dry brush, sort of dragging it. I think I did it sort of vertically mostly because I wanted to replicate the idea of the tree trunks growing up. Yeah. Cool. This is a fairly smoothly painted painting, though. I wasn't really doing that. This is probably, I don't know, might be 10 years old or so. And I wasn't doing a lot of, using a lot of texture at this stage. If I were doing it now, the foreground would be much more textural and much more thickly painted.
Still pretty. Leave it alone. Don't go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was actually painted from a daylight sketch. I did a daylight sketch along the coast of Maine, and then I did a painting from that. I called it Yankee, and it was this sort of old classic New England house perched on the shore. And so I kind of liked the composition, but I didn't want to do the same painting again, but I wanted to use the building and the shoreline. So I thought, well, maybe we'll do a moonlight scene. So all the the color and everything is made up, but the topography and the building are from that daylight sketch. And I called it light waves because it's kind of a little cute play on words because we have waves coming in and we have this moonlight and we have the light from the lighthouse, but they're also photons and light waves. That's how we're seeing it. So it's kind of a little bit of a play on words. Yeah. I tried to get this effect of a night scene but not have it so dark and see how bright I can make it but still get the aspect of it being at nighttime. And if you look in the building on the left, there's a window and there's a little blue screen in there. Someone's on their iPad. And I thought that there's this beautiful night outside with this amazing light and all this happening, and someone sort of squirreled away in their room with their nose in their iPad.
And then you have the stars above, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some stars.
Cool.
And one of those little glass weather vanes in the top of the building, reflecting. It looks like a star, but it's actually one of those glass balls that they use on the not the weather vane, the lightning rod, rather.
Oh yeah. It's gorgeous. I like that one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This is a plein air sketch I did in Italy. Gone to Italy several times, and it's just so beautiful there. The architecture is fascinating, and the countryside. And I love the Tuscan hills, and so this day I went out and I had the place we were staying had some bikes, so I took the bike out and put my painting gear in my backpack and rode off and just explored around, and I found this little spot. And I like the way the road sort of led you into the painting. It sort of sucks you into the center part. And then the building kind of comes back towards you. So this sort of push and pull for me. The road sucks you in, and the building is sort of in your face, coming back, looking at you almost. And then I was really captivated with the sort of undulating hills in the background. But there again, this is kind of a study to understand, basically how the world is put together. This is just this little tiny corner of the universe, but it's something I was, interested in and wanted to figure out, how it all sort of works. Which is, there again, what my plein air paintings are. They're all ways to understand what I'm looking at and sort of understand reality and in a way where we fit in the universe in the grand scheme of things. And by painting it, I feel like I come closer to understanding that than any other way that I can think of.
Yeah, nice.
And just sitting there for, this is probably a 4-hour painting maybe. And studying something really, really intently, you get to this sort of meditative zone state where it's, it's really profound for me.
Yeah. Taking in all the different subtle greens that you have in the painting is amazing.
Where there's so many, green is the hardest color to paint, I think. There are just so many different shades of it. And you get warm greens and cool greens, and it's a very hard color to paint.
It is.
I'm still trying to figure out what the shadow color of green is. I know it's dark, but sometimes I think, well, it's purple. Other times I think, well, it's just sort of a darker shade of the green, or sometimes it's a brownish green. I still can't figure out the shadow color of green.
I don't think you're alone on that one. So.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So this is an example of the plein air painting that I do. It's called sight-size painting. I don't always paint this way, but oftentimes I do. And what I do is I'll look at the scene and I'll paint it exactly the same scale that on my surface is what I'm seeing. And so in theory, if I sort of paint it accurately and the drawing's accurate and the colors are accurate, I should be able to line it up with my subject somewhat and have it kind of blend in with the background. And this is where I did that. I didn't intend to, take this photo, but after I finished the painting, I thought I should take a photo of this setup, and it'd be easy for me to explain to people what site-size painting is. So that's what I did. And you can see I made a couple alterations. The little hill in the left side of the painting I moved up just to give that corner a little bit more interest rather than having it just be a perfectly shaped triangle. If you look at the bottom of the painting, there's a green triangle that sort of leads you in. Mm-hmm. But I put the little brown edge of the hill there just to make it a little bit more interesting. Yeah. And the interesting thing is I try to get the colors exact as I can, but when I started the painting, it was a little bit sunnier and the sky was a little bit bluer. And if you look at the sky, you can see how much it's changed in the period of time that it took me to paint the painting. And the sun had also moved. It was more on my panel, and as it went away from me, my panel became a little bit more in the shade too. So that's, there again, the struggles that we have to deal with as landscape painters that a figure painter or a still life painter doesn't have to deal with. They can paint everything exactly as they see it. Yep. It's also interesting that it's sort of like a time lapse of the period of time I spent there, because some of the things in this little sketch I painted, 3 hours ago, and some of the things I painted like I just finished as I took the photo. Mm-hmm. So it's like almost like a time lapse too, which is kind of an interesting concept of painting.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
This one was called Somewhere in the Night, and this was a made-up painting also. I think I saw a chain link fence one night that was illuminated by the moon or a street light or something, and I thought, oh, that looks really cool. So that was kind of the reason for doing the painting. And then I had to come up with a scenario where we would have a chain link fence. So I thought of maybe this is just sort of some open space and someone is, fenced off part of it. And I like the idea of the fence sort of running down the hillside and the moonlight getting a little bit brighter at the end of the fence. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of a challenge adjusting the values there again to make it look like it's nighttime and it's dark, but also not completely black. Right. And that's always the challenge with night painting, is giving them some light and some life and some interest, but also have them look like night. Sometimes I'll see night paintings and they look like the old Westerns, where they film it during daytime and they put on like a blue filter and it looks, you have all these hard shadows and they're squinting in the moonlight.
Right.
But so that's always a challenge with painting night scenes. But this actually just started off as my desire to paint a chain link fence with light reflecting on it.
Cool. Okay.
This one was painted in North Carolina. They're rice fields next to the Cape Fear River.
And, oh my gosh,
it's
I know right where
painting.
You are.
It's what?
I say I know right where you are. I go down to that area a lot. So.
Oh, all right. Yeah, so it was a cloudy day and kind of ominous looking. I think rain was coming and all that, but it looked, I just liked the composition. I liked the mood, the atmosphere, and I thought I could probably get a painting in before it actually starts raining. And it was really, you have this sort of desolate, lonely, sort of out in the middle of nowhere setting that I was trying to replicate the feeling that I had when I was out there painting. And I don't know if I'll make a larger painting out of this. Probably not. A lot of times with my plein air paintings, if I'm happy with the way they come out and I've kind of said everything in the painting, I won't make a larger version of it. I'll just leave it as a standalone painting and that'll be it. Yeah, other times I'll do a plein air painting and it's not really a finished painting, but I like some of the features or the aspects, or it might be the topography I like or the lighting, but I didn't really get it in the plein air sketch, but I have enough information that I can work with that. So then I'll make a studio painting out of that. But if I've kind of set it all in the plein air sketch, it's almost redundant, and it's like, well, why make another painting out of it? So sometimes I do if I like it, and I just think it would make a nicer large-scale painting. It's almost like copying, really. I'm basically copying the painting that I did in the field, making some adjustments and changes, of course, because when you're in the studio, you know, it's a different experience than being in the field, so the painting's going to come out differently.
I'm really enjoying your subtleness and play of your the complements in this painting, and orange and reds, and you won't believe how closely I'm sitting to my monitor looking at this, but it's just, I mean, it's so subtle, but it's so interesting too. I mean, the red and the green, and then the orange and the blue, and then the purples that you go into. It's just so subtle. It's amazing. So.
Yeah, it was. I think that was maybe one of the things that attracted me was, you know, it's kind of, there's not much of a subject here. It's just everything's flat and horizontal, and just sort of a road going off into the distance. But the colors were really beautiful, I thought, when I was looking at the actual scene. And that's what I was trying to do, is get that sort of soft, subtle shifts in value and color. It's, you know, it's not like an exciting, vibrant, screaming painting, and it wasn't an exciting, vibrant, screaming day. So, you know, I was trying to replicate what I was feeling and experiencing when I was out there in the edge of that field.
Great job.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we got a couple minutes here, and what I'd like to do is kind of ask you if you have any suggestions for encouraging us to stretch ourselves and challenge ourselves to be more fearless and adventurous with our process.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing is to be more fearless and adventurous.
Easy to say, right?
Yeah. Very simple. Oh, here's the one with the sand in it. On the monitor.
Okay, we'll talk about this one then, and then we'll get back to that.
I didn't know I put that one in. Oh, I'm glad I did. Yeah. So this is the one that I added the sand texture to the paint, and it's hard to see it in the monitor, but in the foreground there's not very much paint in the sand. It's kind of stained. In the background, it's pretty well. It's all painted. I also put texture in the trees and the foliage. I used that glass beads in the underpainting. So this painting was kind of planned out pretty carefully in advance, because I didn't want to put the bumpy, lumpy parts where I wanted the sky, which was going to be the smooth part. And it's hard to see it in the image, but the sky is painted very smoothly. There again, I wanted to replicate that ethereal, airy quality that the sky has. And then the land is sort of lumpy, and the water, there's that striated texture to it, and I used that tool, the striating tool. And then the sand is in the beach areas. So, you know, there again, I was trying to replicate the textures as well as the colors that I see in nature. And that's what I'm kind of getting into lately, kind of interested in that aspect. I think the rock in the left, I also put a lot of that, the texture, the modeling paste in the glass beads and that, so the rock has a little bit of texture too, and it's a little bit, stands out against the background. Then I put a shadow in the foreground of someone who's walking on the beach or standing there, and I called the painting first person. So it could be any kind of first person. It could be the first person who ever walked on a beach, or the first person on the earth, or it could be the first person in the morning. It's sort of your own conception of what the first person is, but you're the one that's making the shadow. I want the shadow to belong to the viewer. So I put it in the place where if you were looking at the painting, you'd probably stand somewhat in front of the painting, and the shadow would be the shadow that you cast on the beach. Cool. There again, trying to give a real three-dimensionality to the painting. And I also, in the cloud, there's a cloud in front of the thunder cloud in the background, casting a shadow over it that I think helps make it look a little bit more three-dimensional too. Like you can almost pick up that sort of thin diagonal cloud, almost like you're picking up a pencil or something.
Right.
So it was real for this painting. It was really important to get this sense of depth and space. In reality, I wanted to make it, you know, not like real as in a photograph, but I wanted to have the sense of reality to it, that it was an actual place that you could actually walk into.
So when you're using these other textures, Joe, do you still classify this as an oil painting? Or is it mixed
I think
media
I
all of a
called it
sudden?
mixed media. Yeah,
Okay.
mixed media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I would assume too. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, Sarah, I think I don't know how many questions we have. So, if we don't have any, I'll go ahead and ask Joe another one. But I'd like to get to some of our listeners' questions if they have some.
Okay. We do have a few that came in here. Karen asks, when plein air painting, do you first do a sketch or go right to the paint?
It depends on how sure I am of what I'm going to paint. So I usually have a little mini sketch pad and some pencils in my painting kit. And sometimes I'll do a little thumbnail and try to determine whether it's worth investing the time into the thing that I'm looking at. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. I also do an underpainting oftentimes with acrylic, just black and white, very thin wash. And that helps me determine whether I'm going to spend the time on the painting or not. So sometimes it's a good idea just to spend a minute or two and sort of figure out what you're going to paint and how you're going to compose it. And for that reason, sometimes I will do a little sketch. But other times the light's changing really fast and I want to capture something quickly, or I know what I'm going to paint and I don't have any doubts. So I'll just start right in painting.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Jack asks, does entering the texture sand make it mixed media?
Nope.
You anticipated our question.
Yes, I did. It is mixed media. Yeah.
Yeah. I also have this question about like when I use modeling paste and the glass beads mixed in with the gesso, and then paint on top of that. So the top surface is just paint, but it has this texture and the glass beads and such underneath. I don't know if that's would be called mixed media or just oil paint or not. I'll have to ask an expert if I can find one on painting what that would be classified as.
And then Carla wants to know, for the textures you use, do you mix the sand right into the paint on your palette, or is it applied before or after?
A little of everything. I think when I did this particular painting, I'm just really starting with this. I've done two of these. One has just a tiny bit of sand in the bottom edge of it. And then after I did that one, I did this one. This is the second one I've done. So I'm still experimenting a little bit. With this one, I think I put some glass beads in the gesso underpainting to build up a little bit of texture in the surface of the sand area. And then I painted a tan color so I could sort of judge how it was going to all fit in with the rest of the composition. Then I got some liquid impasto. No, sorry, liquid medium. And I painted that onto the sand area and then sprinkled my sand in, the fine sand in the distance, a little bit rougher sand in the middle ground, and the roughest sand in the foreground. Sprinkled that all in and sort of patted it down with my hand to sort of anchor it into the wet liquid. And then when the liquid dried, I painted another layer of liquid over everything to lock all the sand in. And then when that dried, I think in the foreground, I put some more liquid in and sprinkled some more sand in the foreground because I didn't want all of the sand coated with liquid in the foreground. Then I let everything dry, banged it, and shook off any of the loose sand. And it's amazing how tenacious this sand stuck to the panel. A couple lumps of sand were in the wrong spot, and I was trying to chip them off. And boy, it took a lot of work to chip it off, so the liquid makes a good glue. And so then I had all the sand on there, and then I started painting and toning the sand in the different parts that I wanted painted. And then, like the seaweed, I put some liquid in with the paint, liquid impasto in with the paint, so the seaweed doesn't have the same texture that the sand has, because I didn't want the brown seaweed there to look like brown painted sand. So by putting the liquid impasto in with the paint, it's smoothed out the area. It made it a different texture than the sand part. So it's really important for me to have sort of the right texture for the right part of the painting. Where there again, they're different features. The sand is different than the seaweed, so I didn't want the sand and the seaweed to have the same texture.
I'd really love to see this one up close and personal.
Yeah.
And then we have
it sold really quickly, so I guess it was fascinating for someone else too.
Oh, darn.
You won't be able to see it, unfortunately.
I know. Ain't another one.
I can do some more, though.
Good.
We have a couple questions here about the materials then. Shanti asks, do you mix it with gesso all the time? And then Carla says, I've never heard of it. Could you say the name of the liquid again?
The liquid is, there's two different liquids. One is just plain old liquid, and that's sort of a soupy, sort of a syrupy type of medium, painting medium that you mix in with your paints. And the other is liquid impasto, and that's a gel, a thick gel that that you can mix in with your paints. So I use the liquid impasto when I want to give texture to something. And I'll use the liquid, just the straight liquid, if I want to use it as a medium, or in this case with the sand, I used it for the glue, to glue the sand to the surface. And what was the other question?
Do you mix with gesso all the time?
Do I mix with gesso?
Yeah, that came in, well, a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure what you were talking about at the time it came in.
Well, I paint on gesso all the time. Maybe that's the question. I use acrylic gesso and paint with acrylic gesso. Years ago, I used to paint with the traditional rabbit skin glue and the traditional gesso, and then an oil ground. But I became friendly with a man who was the head of the National Gallery of Art Restoration Department and Conservation Department, rather, and he was really big on using acrylic gesso rather than the traditional rabbit skin glue gesso. He said the test they'd done, it far outperformed the traditional methods, which seemed to make sense. I mean, we've learned a lot in the last 500 years about paint and materials and such.
So that's how you prepare your canvas, Joe, or do you mix it in with your colors?
The gesso?
Yes.
That's how I prepare my canvas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have for now so far.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess we started to talk a little bit about stretch yourselves and challenge yourselves and all that. And I guess, I just wanted to encourage people more to do that. And Joe, do you have any workshops or anything coming up so that if folks are feeling adventurous, that you can kind of help them along in person?
Yeah. Well, I'll be doing the Art of the Carolinas again next year. Mm-hmm. That's in November in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Right.
I'm not sure if they've set the date yet. It's usually like maybe the second weekend in November.
Yeah, it's usually around the 12th or the 13th, 14th, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And then I do another workshop at my home, usually every September. And we may have set the date, but we haven't got it on the new website yet. I'm actually in the process of launching my new website, which should be out in a few days. It's taken forever. But in September, I'll be doing a workshop at my home studio.
And in case you guys...
They can contact me through my old website, which is still out there somewhere.
Right.
And,
in case you guys haven't figured it out, Joe is from Massachusetts. You're up around the Cape Cod area, right?
Yes. Yeah, Cape Cod.
Joe and I have this usual conversation every once in a while where I tell him I like his accent, and he tells me he likes my southern accent. So. Okay. Any place else?
What accent?
Yeah, what accent? I sound like everybody else that lives around here. So, anything else you want to talk to our listeners about, or?
probably kind of covered what we have for how's our time. I guess that's my question.
Well, yeah, it's 2:09 right now.
Okay.
So if there's something you wanted to cover, if not, then we can wrap this show up. And let me check one more time with Sarah, make sure there's no more questions that came in.
We got one question from Shanti. Do you write books?
No, I don't write books. I've been in a few books. They're on my website. My images have been. And I did do a series of articles I had written for Plein Air Today magazine. And they were on plein air painters from the past that I admired. And there's a link on my website to those if someone is interested in reading about some of the historical plein air painters that I admired and what I found about their paintings that I liked. And yeah, that's it. Haven't really written any books. I can barely handle painting, let alone writing books.
Well, and you're
I'll
also
leave that
involved.
to Linda.
Yeah, thanks. And you're also involved in a lot of different things that helps the I would say art market, if you will. But like I think you're involved with the Art Renewal Center in New York.
Yeah, and actually there's a show opening at the Salmagundi Club this week that thunderstorm over the Midwest from a plain window painting will be in the Salmagundi show at the Art Renewal Center's show at the Salmagundi Club that opens this weekend. The Art Renewal Center is this organization that is trying to revive representational painting and bring it back into prominence in the art world. And they they call an international salon every year, where it's one of maybe the biggest competition for representational art out there. And they had a show in Spain that had some of our paintings in, some of the winners of different awards from the Art Renewal Center. And Thunderstorm from the Midwest, over the Midwest from a plain window, was one of the award winners. So that was in the show in Spain, and then they brought the show to New York, and it's opening at the Salmagundi Club. So actually, if anyone is interested, they have several speakers over the next few weeks at the Salmagundi Club talking about various issues relating to representational art in the art world. So if any of you are out there interested, you can look on the Art Renewal Center's website. It's artrenewal.org, or if you just do a search, you can find it, and has information there on what the events are. But it's a great organization. They work really hard, and they have a wonderful website and all kinds of things for art lovers and art practitioners and such. So if you haven't been to their website, definitely go check it out. The problem is they have all these, they have beautiful images, thousands of images of paintings in high def, and you just spend hours looking at them. It's a big time waster.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. You learn something.
Time consumer. How about time consumer?
There you go. That's better.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that will probably wrap up on that note, Sarah. So if you want to go ahead and get started. Joe, thanks so much for being with us.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. It was fun talking to you, and hope everyone out there enjoyed it too.
Yeah. I hope so too.
Thank you guys so much for getting some thank yous in here into the questions log, so I'll just pass those on. Thanks for your time. Thank you guys. And let's see here, I just want to invite everyone, if you shop with us at northlightshop.com, I want to invite you to use our special 10% off coupon code that's just for Linda's Art Chat fans. And that code is ArtChat10, and you can enter it upon checkout and save 10% off your entire order. So please be sure to take advantage of that if you shop at northlightshop.com. And head on over to Artist Network University to find some online courses. And Linda, do we know who we're having for the next Art Chat yet?
I'm not exactly sure yet. I had promised February to Susan Lyon. So I'm going to be getting in touch with Susan and see if she has some time available in February to talk with us. So she's the first person I'm going to go after. So hopefully Susan can join us. Okay.
Well, keep an eye out on your inbox for the next art chat from Linda, so we'll send an email out for that, and you can always visit artistnetwork.com/art-chat and get the information there as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you so much, Linda and Joe. Anything else to say before we go?
Nope, just wanted to say goodbye and thanks for listening, and we always appreciate that you guys take some time out of your day to join us for the talks. And if you have any suggestions or if there's somebody that you might like to see on the show, feel free to drop me an email at cincyredhead@gmail.com.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you have a good day, and we'll see you at the next Art Chat. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joe.
Bye.